Alright, so Dune Awakening just launched. It's an MMO set in the world of Dune, obviously. And currently we're testing the performance with the RTX 5060 Ti. That is paired with 7800X3D. And that again is paired with 32 gigabytes of DDR5 6000 megatransfers per second CL30 memory. And I just waited for daytime before I started my recording here because I think it's a little bit better. It comes across a bit better. Can I actually get my body? Alright, I died to... to that stupid guy over there. Anyway, so just for those of you who's new to the channel, I got quite a few GPUs recently that I plan on testing, multiple games, right? But I've got the RTX 5060 Ti, which is what you're seeing here. Then I also got an RTX 5070. I got an RTX 5070 Ti, which I owned for quite a while. That was actually my personal GPU that I used for a bit. Then I also have the RX 9070 XT, which I used in quite a few of my videos previously, and also the RTX 5080, sorry, which I recently acquired as well. It was actually gifted to me by a friend. The 5060 Ti, 5070, and 5080. Those were gifts, and you know who you are. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Now, let's just go over the settings here quickly before I die again. It's going to be my third time trying to record this video. We are running on the custom preset here. It's not really custom. I'll show you why it shows custom now, but it's the ultra preset, and the reason why it says custom is because we got this upscaling quality setting here, and then also we've got frame generation, right? So if you select ultra, you do have if you've got an Nvidia 50 series GPU, FG4X gets enabled by default. Okay, so just make sure that's off before you start shouting at me in the comments about how your performance is much better than mine, right? So it's probably because you select a preset and frame generation gets triggered. And then also upscaling quality here changes the resolution scale down there. And this is separate from quality, balanced performance, that kind of stuff. So for this, I'm just going to enable override upscaling quality preset, and then we can use quality, balance, that kind of stuff, and performance at 50% and ultra performance at 33%, right? So that's basically the correct scaling, and then this does not really have an impact, right? So we won't be using FG4X, just 1080p on the Epic preset or Ultra preset. This is an Unreal Engine 5 game. We've got Lumen enabled. I'm not entirely sure about, let's just apply, whatever. I'm not entirely sure about Nanite, but I'll let you know in the comments below. So let's start counting our frame rate here. We are getting, the lows aren't great. I've played for about 2 hours, and the game has the usual Unreal Engine 5 stutter, unfortunately. Not as bad, and also the initial start of the game is a lot heavier than actually just playing around here. There's quite a few explosions happening in the intro area and a lot of stuttering as well. So, but that's just the start of the game, the intro, and it seems like the game itself is completely different from what you experienced there. But you can see 80-ish frames per second here, not terrible. I'm just going to change settings in the whilst undercover because you get sunburn. So 80-ish frames per second there, really not terrible for the 5060 Ti 1080p. Just want to show you, let's do some resolution scaling first, not resolution scaling, let's do some preset scaling first, and then we'll see difference between ultra and high. Just make sure that we do disable frame generation again, and then just make sure that, see now it says 77% for DLSS quality. It's going to use DLAA, that's native resolution, right? That's what I've been using previously. So this should now be showing us the difference between ultra and high, and we gained around 10-15 frames per second, right? It's close enough to a high refresh rate experience. This at 1080p, it's pretty decent, I'd say. We are fully GPU bound, although the GPU power is a little bit less, a little bit lower than in other games, but I've found that to be true with the 50 series in a lot of Unreal Engine 5 games. My 5070 Ti and the 5080 also use quite a lot less power in Unreal Engine 5 games for some reason. All right, not going to waste too much time here. So 93 frames per second average here. So I'm just going to drop this down to medium, and then we'll check some DLSS scaling as well. So where are we now? All right, so just the medium preset. Once again, just make sure that if you want to compare results, just make sure that you disable frame generation there. I think the medium should disable Lumen now, right? Yeah, so Lumen is disabled, jar quality is set to medium, everything else is set to medium. And then if we just make sure we select DLAA, like the menu can be a little bit confusing, but if you take some time just to familiarize yourself with it, it should be fine, right? So let's go ahead. This should just be medium without any frame gen. So it looks like we gain around 10 frames per second, around 10%, give or take, for each preset. It's not the biggest difference in performance between Lumen on and off, so I'd say just leave it on, right? So if you've got a 5060 Ti playing at 1080p, I mean, if you are playing at 1080p, I quite like the mechanics here of farming. I think I'll like this game. I think it's pretty good. It looks pretty good as well, right? It's quite a looker in some areas, but also sometimes a little bit disappointing in others. But I mean, that's just my opinion. Just here to look at the performance. So 104 frames per second average there. I think that's pretty decent. I'm not going to test low because I don't think we need to play on low to get a decent playable experience here, right? Now, let's just I think let's go back to the ultra preset and again just do DLAA for a baseline. Just make sure everything is set correctly. All right, so as we saw, around 70-80 frames per second, depending where we are with 1080p DLAA, right? It drops into the low 70s depending where we look, and just trying to avoid those guys because he's got a shield and I play. You can see my ping is 164 milliseconds. I'm in South Africa, and the closest server is the UK. And parrying is a bit of an issue for me when it comes to timing. I just can't get it right. Anyway, so 80-ish. I mean, we saw 80 previously. I just wanted to get a baseline again to see how DLSS actually scales. Yeah. So if we just drop this down to DLSS quality, so the rest of the settings are exactly the same. And if we get our frame rate counter up, that's actually decent. 104 frames per second. But one thing with regards to the driver is that when you start the game, it'll tell you that you need 576.66. I'm running 576.52, but it tells you there's no performance difference. I tested it, but they do say that if you are experiencing crashing issues, just use 576.66 and it'll provide you a link because it's an optional driver. So you can't just download it via the Nvidia app. You have to go to a specific link to download it, and the game does provide that for you. So 100 frames per second DLSS quality. I wouldn't use anything more aggressive than DLSS quality at 1440p, right? I think at 1080p, I mean, a DLSS quality at 1080p is already like on the limits for me personally, but I mean, each to their own. All right, so one other thing that I want to test before we go to 1440p is I want to select DLSS, I want to select DLAA, yeah, and then I want to test frame generation. Just to give you an idea, I do have the latency numbers in the top right hand corner there at the moment. So let me just get a base latency number. Yeah, okay, 140 trillion milliseconds. 184 trillion milliseconds. I don't think we're going to get latency numbers. For some reason it's not reporting. Maybe we need the new driver for that. Now it's reporting correctly in here. Let me just enable reflex here quickly. Let's see if it'll enable the reporting correctly. So all right, that helped. Okay, so 25, 27. Let's just call it. Oops, I got sunburned. 30 milliseconds, give or take, right? Sometimes less, slightly more at other times. It's not an issue. Okay, so let's go ahead and enable. I keep on forgetting to close the tutorial. Sorry. So the screen is maybe a little bit cluttered. So let's enable frame generation quickly. I'm going to do 2x, 3x, and 4x just quickly to give you an idea what the changes are. So right now we were seeing around 80 frames per second. Now, we do not see a doubling of our frame rate. And also, it does use the new DLSS Frame Generation model, so the lows aren't reporting correctly. Neither is the frame time graph. So just look at the average and the current frame rate. Unfortunately, you can't see the lows properly. And our latency is, I mean, it went from 30 milliseconds to 35, 36 milliseconds. So really not too bad. My network latency is like 4 times that, so it's really not going to make a difference. All right, so 124 frames per second here with 2x frame gen. I'm going to just enable 3x and then 4x, and we'll move on to 1440p. All right, so we gained another 50-60 frames per second here. I mean, of motion smoothness. This does not increase your performance, right? It's I mean, it's generating additional frames, but as long as the input latency still stays like it is now, below 40 milliseconds up, this is actually perfectly fine. I can definitely play like this. I do daily 165 hertz panel. Doesn't seem to be a lot of artifacting, ghosting, that kind of stuff. The crosshair seems to be quite stable. I think 3x FG is actually not terrible. I know a lot of people don't like it. If you don't like it, don't use it. Some people like it, they can use it. I mean, I quite like it. So 165 to 180 frames per second here with 3x FG, and then let's just test 4x FG as well quickly. I'm actually more interested in the latency numbers here. So let's just see if the latency numbers increase. Sorry if my voice disappears slightly every now and again. It's because I have to look down to get all my keys on my keyboard working. But we didn't gain that much going to 4x, right? Maybe 30-ish frames per second. Also, time of day is changing now, so it is a bit difficult to keep it uniform. I have to say that the game's visuals, it is pretty good. I quite like it. Like, sure, it's very barren where we are at the moment. Maybe it'll like get better. I'm not sure, but I think overall it's a very, very good experience here at 1080p, even on the Ultra preset. Typically, Unreal Engine 5 games are not that good on the Ultra preset. Like it's almost always completely overly heavy. All right, I think that's it for 1080p. I'm going to move on to 1440p, and then we'll do one test at 4K. Just want to see if we can actually get 4K 60 frames per second without any frame generation. All right, so 1440p on the Ultra preset, I believe, right? So everything's set to Ultra. We got Lumen enabled. We do not have frame generation enabled. We do not have DLSS enabled. All right, so this is a little bit more rough. Okay, so 55-ish frames per second. One thing I want you to just note, there's the VRAM usage. This is 1440p Ultra native, right? MSI Afterburner is reporting below 6 gigabytes of VRAM used. So you can maybe add 1 gig to that, right? So let's call it 7 gigabytes of VRAM used. So you should be okay even on an 8 gigabyte GPU in this game. I've noticed that, I wouldn't say typically, but there are a lot of Unreal Engine 5 games that are actually quite light on VRAM. It's really, I think it does help a lot. Like, I do have a lot of issues with the Unreal Engine 5, but in most games, I don't think VRAM is an issue. Okay, we died there. But our average frame rate there was 53 frames per second. I need to get my backpack because I stole a lot of stuff. Maybe it's karma. All right, so 53 frames per second average there. I want to enable DLSS quality, and then we'll see. Actually, I lied. I'm going to enable the high preset, but we'll go for no frame gen, and then also just DLAA, right? So exactly the same settings as before. Let's see 1440p high if we actually get a 60 frames per second experience here, and it seems like we do. I'm going to try and get my backpack without dying again, and I mean, we can benchmark while we are on the way there. But it seems like 60 frames per second is possible at 1440p native on the high preset. Not on the ultra preset, but I'm pretty sure that we can use DLSS quality to get us to at 60 frames per second on the ultra preset as well. I'm not sure why I suck so much, but just to give an idea, here's my excuse. I'm actually looking at this on a much smaller screen. I'm looking at this through my OBS monitor. My 4K monitor is to my left, but I'm just looking at it here. Out of ammo. Okay. Never mind. 70 frames per second. I'm just going to craft some ammo. We'll show those guys what's what. But not before we drop down to the medium preset. Alright, so again, medium preset, just disable any of the upscaling stuff and frame generation stuff. Alright, so DLAA, no frame gen, medium preset. Alright, I think we're ready. On the medium preset, 1440p native, and I'm ready. I'm also thirsty. Let me show you. This is actually quite strange. You actually drink blood in this game. So we'll have to kill these guys. If I can actually just... Oh, these guys have shields as well, don't they? Maybe not. Alright, so what you do is you've got this like blood sucking thing. And you take the blood and then you go to your base and you basically make the blood drinkable. Like, it's very, very, very strange. Anyway, so 76 frames per second, yeah, I think it's pretty decent. 1440p medium still looks plenty good. I think if you're not interested in any frame generation or any upscaling, then 1440p medium preset will definitely still get you a 60 frame rate experience, or 60 FPS experience, let's call it that. All right, so now let's just go ahead and go back to the ultra preset again. Then we'll test some DLSS scaling without any frame generation. So you see that it says DLSS 87%, even though it says quality there. So just make sure that you do select override on, and then just go balance and then quality. Then it's 67%, which is the correct one. So ultra preset, no frame generation, and DLSS quality, which I think is still plenty good. I think DLSS balanced is still plenty good at 1440p. Game looks very crisp. Our latency is again 18 trillion billion. I think that is maybe a mistake. Let me just see if reflex is enabled. I don't think so. Alright, so let's just enable reflex, because then our latency numbers are at least, should be reporting correctly. Alright, so what I want to show you here is you go to your blood machine, right, and then you take the blood that you just took from the corpse, you deposit it in here, and then you can actually get some water. And we do need some water. Alright. Let me get my... We're here for benchmarks, sorry. Okay, so 80-ish frames per second here. Very, very decent. Like, I don't think it is even necessary to drop down to balanced here. Let's just see what the DLSS scaling looks like. So 80-ish frames per second. And if we just drop this down to balanced quickly... not a lot of difference, right? So we went from 80 to 85, 86. So I think if you do want a high frame rate here, then either drop down to the high or medium preset, or use frame generation. The game feels plenty good, yeah. Like 25, 26 milliseconds of latency. That's PC latency, right? Not network latency, not end-to-end latency, not frame times. That's PC latency. It sits in the middle between end-to-end latency, but it's the only thing that I can measure because I do not have an LDAT. Okay, so if we go to, let's leave it on ultra DLSS quality. Where are we now? So let's just do DLSS quality, right? And then I'm going to do 2x FG, because we were seeing around 75, 80 frames per second, right? And around 25, 30 milliseconds of PC latency. And now we're seeing 125 frames per second here, and PC latency is slightly increased, right? We went from around 25, 30 to around 35, 40. It feels perfectly fine. I honestly wouldn't mind playing this game like this at all. And remember, this is now on the Ultra preset with the DLSS set to quality and frame generation to X 120 frames per second. It feels great. It looks great. I don't know. This is a pretty good experience. And we're using about 6 gigabytes of our available 16 gigabytes of VRAM. So let's go ahead and just do 3x and 4x. Let's just see. Like you're not going to get triple or quadruple your frame rate by enabling this. There is overhead, right? If we did get true 100% scaling with it, we would see 180 frames per second, but we don't. So we gained around 40-ish frames per second instead of 60. But still, this is enough to max out my 165 Hz 1440p panel. It should be able to do it almost consistently, right? Depending on what happens later on. I mean, we are pretty much on the edge, but in this specific spot, we have no issue maintaining that at all. All right, so that's actually a pretty decent experience. 165 FPS there. Let's just do 4x, and then I'll do one test at 4K, just for those of you who are interested in using this GPU for 4K. Technically, I don't think it should be used at 4K. I don't think it has the horsepower, but it does have the VRAM for most games to be run at 4K, right? So 196, 180. So we went from 160 to 200 about, right? The crosshair still looks very stable. There's really no issue with the crosshair and 4x FG. You might see additional artifacting in the YouTube video, but that's because YouTube is capped to 60 frames per second. My output is captured at 60 frames per second. So if we are doing 180 FPS here, the capture card only doing 60, 120 frames per second are not being captured. So you will see some visual anomalies in the YouTube video. Anyway, that's what it is. All right, so 210 frames per second there, give or take. Let's try 4K, and then we'll call it a day. All right, we are at 4K on the high preset with DLSS set to quality. It's actually not a horrible experience. Almost maintaining 60 frames per second there, although I mean, we do drop below it quite often, and in more demanding areas we will definitely drop even further, right? Where those more demanding areas are, I won't be able to tell you because I haven't played the game that much. So that's not cool. 4K DLSS quality, high preset, probably not the best way. We got 2 minutes to complete this benchmark before the sandstorm will kill us. What do we need to change? I think let's try and see if 4K high actually gets us playable experience. Right, so we've got 70-ish FPS here. I just want to see where my base is. I'm a little bit lost at the moment. I think my base is around the corner there, just in case we hit the the sandstorm early. Okay, so 60-ish FPS here. DLSS balanced. It's, I think it's a good compromise if you're aiming for 4K 60. Obviously, you can drop this down to performance. It'll get you around 80-ish frames per second, and then you can also enable frame generation. I'm going to enable frame generation as we are. I want to see at 4K if we actually see a decent increase to our frame rate here. So 70-ish FPS, and if we then enable just 2x FG, I'm just going to do. I don't think there's a lot of people that'll be using 4K for this GPU for 4K. All right, so 2x FG, and that's about 105. The latency now is a little bit more noticeable, right? Seeing around 50 milliseconds of PC latency. It is definitely more noticeable. So I think in this case, like I would just not use frame duration at 4K, right? Unless you're okay with the additional input latency. But if we have a look here, like our latency basically halved. Why does it keep on disabling reflex? That's quite annoying. Where's the reflex anyway? Alright, so 25 milliseconds of PC latency and 70-ish frames per second. I think that's decent enough. Right. Alright, so we just I think we made it in time. I'm going to wait out the wait out the storm here before I play any further. But okay, wow. I don't know what's happening now. Okay, there we go. I think maybe just as the sandstorm was loading in, we saw quite a lot of frame rate drops there, but we are safe now. Alright, that's going to be it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and as always, we hope to see you in the next one.